we come to the second part of the event, where I'm going to direct some questions to individual panelists, and I would like other panelists to follow up with an answer if they would like to, if they feel like there's more to talk about. So I'm going to start with Dr. James. How can we increase the global awareness of genocide happening today?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, it's a great question, and it follows on, I think this panel is going exactly the right direction, which is the discussion of what are the strategies to deal with that. And I think I should particularly start with the U.S., since, again, I was most critical of kind of what the U.S. contribution has been. And so you hinted at awareness and situational awareness and talked about the kind of the war of ideas, and which are things which are in between, I think, the caricatures of where U.S. policy has gone from kind of overlordship, which is a bad idea, to this notion of kind of disengagement, which is what we're currently doing, which is a bad idea. And the strategy obviously is something we're in the middle, particularly what you talked about, this notion of engagement and empowerment, which I think is something, well, you touched on and you touched on as well. And so there is a part in there, and it works like this. You know the story, there's a guy, this is answering your question, there's a guy, right, and the cop walks up, and it's the middle of the night, and there's this guy, and he's crawling on his hands and knees under the street light, and the cop goes, "What are you doing?" And the guy goes, "Well, I dropped my keys by the car, I'm looking for my keys." And the policeman goes, "Oh, okay, I'll help you." He goes, "Where's your car?" He goes, "Well, it's down the street, in the dark." He goes, "What are you doing here?" He goes, "Well, the light's better here." Right? So I think so not to criticize your question, but your question is why aren't we dealing with that problem, which is, again, I think often the way we do this, why aren't we dealing with the thing that's on CNN right now? Why aren't we doing something about the barrel bombs in Damascus? Why aren't we doing something about the chaos in Libya? But when you're dealing with genocide, I actually go back to my point, is if you wait till the fire is raging, that's really, so the number one thing I would do, I agree, identify, name the enemy, I get that, but the number two thing I would do is don't let it happen, particularly in places that are really, really important. So where I would start the effort is the countries which have enormous potential, which really could be the fire break in that region, and the United States should be engaging and empowering and working with them to make sure the very first thing is there is a stable line of countries to begin with. And I would start with Tunisia, which the birthplace of the Arab Spring, which is next door to Libya. And if you're going to solve Libya someday, a stable Tunisia would be a great start for that. I would go to Morocco. I go to Egypt, which is an enormously strategically important country, and Jordan, and go into kind of reclaiming Iraq. And I think if the United States was engaging and empowering with those countries and had that strong network of bilateral alliances, that to me that would be number two. And then to your point of number three, which is you have to, the way you describe the ideology is at some point we have to put a crushing defeat on ISIS and Al-Qaeda so their brand is destroyed. That's the most important thing. So not to say your question is not irrelevant, but bringing awareness is kind of saying there's a fire, after it's raged across the plain, and I'm not so sure that's the place I would start.
Yeah, but my fear is sometimes part of solving the problem is realizing that there's a problem, and with our policy and administration nowadays, we're denying that there's a problem out there.
Yeah, but the problem, not to argue back, but the problem, by the time there's a problem, it's so intractable, it's impossible to solve, which is exactly what you see with the administration. They go, Syria, Libya, these are terrible countries. So you want it to be proactive. You want it to be proactive, which I really highly appreciate. But this is maybe for 2025. But right. What would do in 2015? That's my question.
Just to kind of piggyback, James, on your third point, I think, look, the elephant in the room here, it's probably not an appealing option to a lot of people, but who's the main purveyor of the genocide right now? ISIS in the Middle East. Yes. They're pushing it mainly. If we don't defeat and crush ISIS militarily, the genocide's probably not going to stop, to be quite frank. That's not appealing. A lot of people don't want to go to war. I'm not advocating a full-scale ground invasion of Iraq, but let's be honest, without some kind of ground presence, can ISIS really be defeated? If the goal is to defeat and destroy and degrade ISIS, defeat them decisively and stop this. Can we really do it with limited airstrikes? We can weaken them with limited airstrikes. I'm not a military strategist. I'll be the first person to admit that. But in talking to wise military strategists, they say, look at 2001. Look at Afghanistan. We had U.S. Special Forces, CIA on the ground working with the Northern Alliance. They routed the Taliban. Now, different situation, obviously, in Iraq and Syria, but can we not work with Kurds, with moderate Iraqi Sunni tribes, with Assyrian Christians who want to root out this murderous enemy in their midst? They're begging for leadership, and the leader of the free world right now, in my view, is MIA. And I think, look, at the end of the day, if you crush ISIS, or at least do a pretty good job of weakening them severely militarily, you demoralize the ideology, you discredit the ideology, you movement. But if you let it continue to metastasize, then the ideology and the genocide is going to continue to metastasize. ISIS is spreading its tentacles now into Afghanistan, Algeria, Sinai, Nigeria in the form of Boko Haram. So look, if you don't handle it now and deal with it now, it's going to continue to grow. And yes, they've been set back in ways in the Middle East, but again, they've attracted people from 90 countries, and a pipeline continues from right here in the West to Iraq and Syria. So what are you going to do about it? Obviously, as I discussed, the ideological component, major component. But I think at the end of the day, and again, I'm not a military strategist, I'll be the first to admit, but if you don't handle it on the ground, you're not going to defeat it, and it's going to continue.
Dr. Nadia wanted to comment, but I'm going to ask that question, so if you want to incorporate it into your answer. Is stopping genocide always worth risking U.S. troops, like in Iraq, Syria, Rwanda, Bosnia, on the ground?
I actually believe that if we crush ISIS, no problem, there'll be another one maybe more grotesque than ISIS. Because we have a problem in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, that we refuse to acknowledge, which is all of these Europeans you mentioned, they have one thing in common. They are Muslims. But I'm not saying there's something wrong with Islam. What I am saying is that we have in common that we are exposed to certain master narratives. And these master narratives, we know, no matter where we're born, these master narratives include, for example, that the greatest thing, like if you are a humiliated Muslim, if you are defeated, you have the caliphate as the ultimate goal for your existence. So you are taught since infancy, when you have caliphate, all your problems go away. So be a hero, do something for your people, and let's establish the caliphate.
So it's the teaching, is that what you're trying to say?
Absolutely. Islamic thought needs reform. There is no question about it.
So do you agree with President Sisi when he mentioned that there should be re-addressing of the religious speech?
Absolutely. So look, guess what ISIS teaches in the places where it enforces its law? They teach Wahhabism. They teach the writings of Abdul Wahhab. What does that mean? Why does ISIS choose to enforce unless we question the ideology, we can get rid of ISIS. There was Al-Qaeda, there'll be another name. It doesn't matter. The ideology that children are born and raised with is, and I went to Islamic schools, there is so much hate, man. There is so much misogyny. You can't digest it, but you don't open your mouth because there's no room. There's no...
Is it peer pressure kind of thing? Peer pressure?
You know, because you are negated. There is no individualism. There is no space where you can be different. And this is what produces ISIS. That I own the truth and I can kill you if you disagree with me. So I want to give you an example of the problem we face in the Arab world because the religious institutions refuse to go to the problem and address it. The former Mufti of Egypt has deemed somebody who said we should not force women to wear the scarf. Women who want to wear the scarf should not be allowed to wear the scarf. The former Mufti said this man is an infidel. He was ready to excommunicate him from Islam. So to give somebody who says a statement that should be self-evident, you shouldn't force people to wear the scarf. The problem with this statement is that Al-Azhar, the highest institution, it's like the equivalent of the Vatican for the Arab world. Not quite, because we don't believe really, theoretically we don't believe in authority, but in actuality we do. they refuse to excommunicate ISIS. So you refuse to excommunicate criminals who are hurting all of the humanity. And you think it's more dangerous that people do not force their female relatives to force them to wear something they don't want to wear? You see how skewed this perspective is? This is our religious institutions. They think it's more dangerous that you wear something by force than you kill people. So unless we have reform, there'll be another one.
So, Dr. Walid Faris, is stopping genocide always worth risking U.S. troops like in Iraq, Syria?
This is like a big game called Lego that the kids play. Every question deserves a positive answer. Whenever troops are needed, I'm going to say it now, yes, there will be troops.
So we need it.
Whenever troops are needed. We don't want to fall into the game that we have in Washington. Either you use troops or you don't use troops. This is a tool. And the tool, you decide when you're going to use it. Let me go back to the Lego game. Every answer that has been given is a piece of a Lego. The question is, how are you going to structure it? And let me give you one attempt. My colleague and many colleagues and myself have been asserting that you need to have a serious revolution, just a reform, a deep revolution, for all the ISISs and the ideologies and the Khomeinists and everybody to go. All right? But guys, this is a 20 to 25 years project, which had we began in 1990 when I came to this country, would have been today celebrating liberal democracies in the Middle East. So time is part of what we decide. On the other hand, the mention of, yeah, let's destroy ISIS on the ground, because if we don't destroy ISIS on the ground, no reform is going to rise. So you have sort of a contradiction. I would divide it in two. You have, first of all, what can we do now with whatever tools we have, with whatever geopolitical situation on the ground that we have, so that we can weaken and reverse ISIS on the one hand? And what can we do so that our public opinion here in America and in Europe would be able to support such a policy with our government? Because if you have 90% of American people going for football or thinking that jihad is yoga, we're not going to be able to sustain any policy. Sahih, jihad is yoga. So now, I am not sure now as to what to answer. Usually I have all the answers. Should we put all the investments here in America in the public, so we have a great public that would elect the right people in the legislative, in the next administration, and have the right policy, and then take our time in the Middle East? Or should we, with whatever we have now, engage? Now, answering one of the dramas that we have here, destroy ISIS. Well, one of the problems we have in destroying ISIS, and this is a matter for discussion, is that there is a force in the region that is obstructing us from destroying ISIS the way we need to destroy it. Can anybody know what is that force in the region?
Yeah, we're coming to it in the question.
All right, so
I'll
leave my time to it.
Yes, and I actually marked that question for Dr. Walid Faris, so for the enemy in the region that is giving us a hard time to come in and fight ISIS. My question is for Lina, is will the NATO do more to stop genocide outside of Europe?
I don't think decisions will be made in NATO to stop genocide. I don't think that's the first step to be done. I disagree that genocide should be solved with military action. My belief is that genocide can be, the first thing is ideology that has to be dealt with, and then we speak about religion. And I don't believe that military action would help solving it. It would rise again. Different people, different means. We see the budget for ISIS, it's $2 billion. Their social network, everything they do, I don't believe it's possible to solve with military action. So I wouldn't encourage NATO to be the first to react. First of all. Second of all, I don't believe that we are at the stage, as I said before, that we have learned from our mistakes. I don't believe that the countries who are pretty split right now, NATO member countries, over Ukraine, over what's happening in the Middle East, would be able to come together and agree on an action. I think that's that's what Putin has been succeeding in, splitting NATO, and I don't believe in near future will come to a decision to actually use military force to stop genocide.
I want to reform the question and ask Tara about this question again about the NATO. Not that I disagree with you, but you know, I can't say my personal opinion right now. But when people were killed in France, in Paris, there was a big march. There so many countries ran. We weren't part of it as the U.S. Obviously, I don't know why. But and then when people were killed in Kenya, Somalia, Middle East, 2,000 people were killed in Nigeria 2 months ago. 120 people were killed in Kenya a month ago. There was no march. We never heard anything from the NATO. So my actual question is, the European citizen is more valuable than African or Asian citizen? Is that what it is?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
I'm sorry to put it this way, but
yeah, no. I mean, that's the thing is that like it's our brothers and sisters who are being killed out in the Middle East right now on the front lines, and it should be the same as a European. And I think that's where there isn't the response that is needed. And for an example is with the airstrikes in Libya after the 21 Egyptians were beheaded, when Egypt immediately conducted airstrikes, powerful airstrikes, to send a message not to do that again. And the United States' response was we didn't support the airstrikes, but we didn't, condemn the airstrikes, but we didn't support them. And I think that's where there is a lack of response. And then 30 Ethiopians were beheaded. Where was NATO there? Where is the United States? Where is the outrage when you have 50 people get beheaded publicly? That should incite outrage in everybody. That should make everybody want to do something. And so I think absolutely when you do have that kind of the mass killings over in the Middle East, even if it is in Africa or it is in the Middle East, it should still have the same response here. And I think that's where there is frustration amongst the American people too with the lack of response. Given the beheadings and everything that is happening, I think that the military does need to, like you were saying, Eric, they have to win the war, you have to break the will of the enemy. You have to break their will to fight. And how do you break their will to fight is by force. And they are using force, they are inciting fear, they are doing the most gruesome, grotesque killings that that we've seen, to be able to behead people publicly on TV like that. Slowly. That takes a strong military response, and it should be an immediate response. And that's why I really just commend and support Egypt when they did conduct those airstrikes. That's effective. That's very effective. They hit their strongholds, and never should we ever see pictures of ISIS convoys. To me, I don't understand that. If we can see these pictures of ISIS convoys, that means an airstrike can hit those convoys. So I don't understand, if we have that kind of intelligence, why are we not using the force that we can use? And why isn't NATO doing something when we can?
Dr. Karafan, let me give him a chance first, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, because I want to try to bridge those comments, because I appreciate your comment, but I think it's a question of not either or. I think it's a question of appropriateness. So if you look at National Socialism in the 1930s, you're right? The answer was not invade Germany. The answer was to speak truth to an evil ideology that was spreading everywhere, and people were sitting and being silent. That was the time to rise up and call evil by its face. On the other hand, in 1944, calling Nazism evil was not going to stop the Holocaust. It had to be done by force. So the interesting thing about the Middle East today is we have this enormous complexity where we have places where we should be doing exactly what you're saying and we were saying. We should be fighting the war of ideas, and we're not. But on the other hand, we also have places where freedom is only going to come through liberation, whether it's through troops or somebody's troops. But unless the ideas are being killed at the point of a knife and a gun, and unless somebody takes the knife and a gun away from those guys, that killing's not going to stop.
You stole what I was going to say. Okay. I mean, I was going to say, with all you make great points, but look, Hitler, wasn't stopped with a feathered pen. He was stopped with military action. And today, ISIS is not going to be stopped. They're not going to stop because we shake our fist and say, genocide is wrong, what you're doing is horrible. At the end of the day, unless someone stands in their way physically, they're going to continue conducting genocide. And yes, no one believes more than me, the ideological struggle I mentioned earlier, that's how this is ultimately going to be won, 2025 perhaps, as we said. But until we get there for the next, I don't know, 10 years or whatever, the genocide's going to continue as we're fighting the ideological war. So I think it's just kind of unrealistic to think that we can defeat genocide without confronting the genocidal murderers who are doing it.
But in fairness, in 1935, maybe you could stop it.
Exactly. And today, too, Dr. Carr found a great point. We could stop it today, but the will isn't there on one hand, and just the ability or the desire to confront the ideology and acknowledge again that it exists. Real quick, with military action in Iraq, I believe vital U.S. interests are at stake there. Because of this pipeline I talked about of Westerners going there, think of the atmosphere in taking genocide out of it for a second, just U.S. interest as an American. Think of the atmosphere in Afghanistan before 9/11, where Al-Qaeda established a safe haven. They were able to plot and plan 9/11. Right now, ISIS controls 35,000 square miles of territory in the heart of the Middle East, where they have free reign to plot and plan a lot of nasty things. So I think to let that continue to develop is a mistake.
In support of what you said, just an observation I noticed, and you can agree or disagree with me, but when ISIS tried to attack Egyptians in Libya, and I say Egyptians, not Copts, because I think those who are Egyptian, their background is much more important to be Egyptian than being Coptic at this point. And when Egypt responded within few hours, I think Egypt had drawn a red line from ISIS to come to Egypt. I mean, I'm saying this and I'm knocking on wood, but I think we taught them a lesson. They kind of scared to come to the region, so maybe a military action would be a solution at this point. Dr.
I want to say that actually I support what Faris said, that it's a pie and there are many pieces. So we cannot fight only through one lens. So research indicates actually that when terrorist organizations, no matter what their name is, but when they have land, they are so helped by so many factors. They are able to raise, ISIS is teaching a generation in Al-Mosul, in Al-Raqqa. They are entire kids. So they need to be on the run. They need to have no safe haven. It's actually really important as part of the holistic strategy, because stability means more recruits, more moral support, that look what we're able to do. When ISIS seized Mosul, their recruits were more than quadrupled. Yeah. Because now they have weapons, they have lands, and also they can use it to entice others to join.
Success breeds attraction.
Exactly.
Add something too, as far with the ideology, and that's another thing to bring up Egypt again. Right after the removal of Morsi in July 2013, Egypt not only did the operations in Sinai with the military, but they also went after the ideology, and they banned 55,000 unlicensed radical clerics from preaching in their mosques.
Yes.
And that is something, they did. They addressed the ideology, and that's something that President Sisi, he's been consistently calling for, this religious revolution. And that's something that the U.S. should really start getting behind, and it's not getting picked up here, and he's not getting the momentum to be, in the U.S. to be able to get behind that religious revolution. And it was followed up by the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar. And so that is something to address the ideology at the same time as using a hard hand in the military as well.
Dr. Walid Faris, having the current circumstances and what we know about the Iranian treaties with the U.S. administration about the nuclear weapons, and going back to your question earlier, will Iran launch genocide against Jews and Christians and minorities in the Middle East and the Sunnis if they have nuclear weapons?
Well, what is interesting and ironic is that the Iranian regime today claim that they are the ones defending the the minorities.
Yeah,
The propaganda machine are saying, oh, we and Assad, we the protectors of the Christians and the Yazidis, whereby inside their borders, they have been going after the Arabs and Ahwaz, the Kurds. There were demonstrations all over last week. They are executing leaders of the Baluch, and they are also suppressing, as we know, their own people. Anybody under age 20 that we saw during the uprising of June 2009, was a living example of that next generation, plus the exiled community of Iran, the resistance movement of Iran. So to go back to your point, and the point I made before, when the gentleman and all members of the panel were mentioning, why don't we go after ISIS and block ISIS and destroy it? Well, one of the blockages in the Middle East is the Iranian regime. They want us to come by the air to soften up and weaken ISIS, and they want to be the ground troops. Their militias, their forces want to be the one to go inside the Sunni triangle. They want the Assad regime to go and and take from ISIS position. So as long as you have this mechanism that block us, it's going to be very difficult. And the blockage is not in the region; it's here in Washington D.C. It's with the advisors and the experts. And same thing happened in North Africa, what Tara was mentioning. Just imagine, give me 1 second to mention one thing. Just imagine if the Egyptian revolution did not happen. Just imagine if 33 million Egyptians were not courageous enough to go on the streets and remove Morsi. Egypt would have been today the Sunni Iran.
Yes.
From Gaza to Morocco. So thank God there was Egyptian revolution, and what we need to do is to support this Egyptian revolution, and to support, let me take the case all the way, a renewed youth revolution and resistance in Iran. I mean, these are the different directions. What we have now is one direction. We need to have a different direction, and it's only when we have a different direction that we can collect dividends on the ground.
If Iran grows more powerful, will Shia widen genocide against Sunnis? Eric?
If Iran grows more powerful, will Shias, well, they're attempting it right now. Look,
Because we're talking genocide in general. So.
Yeah, we're just talking genocide on a Thursday night. Look, Iran, thank God you brought Iran up, Dr. Morgan, because look, you have the two pillars we're talking ideology, Sunni jihadist ideology epitomized today by ISIS, but the Shia jihadi ideology of Iran. Look, there's a civil war between Sunni Shia jihadists right now in the Middle East to a great extent. And at the end of the day, that's obviously a major reason why ISIS and Iran are opposing each other. But at the end of the day, really, they kind of want the same thing. And ISIS stands in the way of Iran's march across the region and domination of the region. Right now, Iran, it's been said many times, Iran essentially controls 4 Arab capitals: Sana'a, Beirut, Damascus, and Baghdad. ISIS stands in the way of Iran's full goals for the region. Let me just mention, we talked about genocidal aspirations for this Iranian regime. I personally don't trust the Ayatollah Khamenei in this regime based on their 36-year track record of bloodshed and terror. But again, just for an American audience, and we talk about genocidal weapons, nuclear weapons that Iran is developing, Iran is also developing, and this isn't mentioned very much, intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, that could one day reach the United States. Now, why would they do that? I'm sure it's just a coincidence. You only develop ICBMs for one reason, to mount them with a nuclear warhead. Maybe it has something to do with the mullahs and the radicals of this regime still consider America the great Satan, in their words. In Tehran a few weeks ago, Ayatollah Khamenei led chants of death to America at a rally in Tehran. These are not our friends. And on the flip side, the Muslim Brotherhood are not our friends, another organization, entity that unfortunately our current government has embraced in many ways. If you want to talk about the ideology, who's the granddaddy of them all in the modern age of this jihadist movement? It starts with the Brotherhood, founded in 1928 in Egypt. We wouldn't be talking about ISIS if the Brotherhood was never created. All of this spawned in the modern era from the Brotherhood. Bin Laden, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Zawahiri, all passed through the Brotherhood before they formed Al-Qaeda. The Brotherhood is the gateway drug to jihad. So we have a hard time right now in the United States and in Europe, at the governmental level at least, of identifying our friends and our enemies. The Iranian regime and the Muslim Brotherhood are not our friends, and they are not friends to people who oppose genocide, I can tell you that.
Dr. Carafano, do you think the administration, or, I'm just hypothetically thinking, that they figure that in order to combat terrorism and push these bad guys away from the U.S. soil, let's create another group, put them there, they fight together, we're in peace. It's a good scenario for the Americans, but I don't know if is it fair for the minorities and the, peaceful people that live in that region.
I think, to be honest, right, there are voices in America who say, let them fight it out amongst themselves. And there are also voices in America that say, if we disengage, people will solve their own problems. They're going to solve their own problems.
Let them work it out.
Here's the problem with that, right? Which is, either one of those scenarios could very well spin into a large regional war. Right? Because even if Saudi Arabia and Israel and Egypt have the goodwill to arm shoulder to shoulder, right? That is not sufficient without the backing and support of the United States to shift the momentum decisively towards peace and stability. If Sunni and Shia want to war, and the extremists are driving the agenda, and they increasingly find places to fight with each other, that is not going to work things out. That is going to spiral the violence. And so either one of those scenarios, for those in the United States who would say, look, it's not our problem, either one of those scenarios could get to the point where you're actually talking about regional conflict. And I was sitting here thinking, I'm thinking, regional conflict means mass death. There are a lot of armies and a lot of weapons, and if this thing spins out of control, a lot of people are going to die. And so I'm asking myself, well, maybe that's not as bad, right? Because genocide is intentionally burning big numbers of people. War is unintentionally burning big numbers of people. But I'm not thinking necessarily one's more virtuous than the other. And I'm as worried about the spiraling regional conflict between the inaction of standing back or the blind hope of just leaving them alone to work things out. That the problem could be not an intentional genocide, but an unintentional genocide from a conflict that spars far beyond the borders. We seem driven by exactly the two things that they talked about: Iranian extremism on one side, and this rural ISIS Sunni extremism on the other. And I actually agree with everybody said here, because the point is not that it's the place of the United States to step in and solve the problem. But the point of this discussion about your question was, it's also not the place of the United States to stand back and look it alone, because even if you were okay with mass death, where nobody should be, that war is not going to stop there. It's going to affect us and our interests, so we have a reason to be there. So there is this kind of magic place of engaging and enabling, that where the United States has to act. Maybe leading is not the right word. It's not about leading, but it's helping people take peace and stability back to that region. And we need to do a more positive role than this administration is doing. The reality is we've got 19 months where that's very unlikely to happen. And then there may be a dawn in which maybe it will happen. We'll see.
Mike, a quick addition to what Chance mentioned in terms of the theory of they're going to go at it against each other. First of all, it's not the Shia and the Sunni. It's the Khomeinis among the Shia and the Jihadist Salafi among the Sunni. Because 90% of everybody else wants jobs and life and love and, die without the...
I'm glad you specified it. Thank you very much.
All of us will agree on this.
Yes.
Absolutely. Now, there is a scenario that we poorly address, except if people are really following it. Well, if the Salafi jihadists will take every space in the Sunni sphere, and the Khomeinis take every single space they can in the Shia sphere, and then they fight against each other, and they establish a balance of power, and then settle, what do you think they're going to do? Just you have to project into the future. If they cannot destroy each other at the end of the day, because both will obtain the doomsday device, they're going to turn their guns against the other side. I mean, we have always to think of these scenarios, and not bank always, they're going to destroy each other as if they have no rationale. They do have a rationale. Once they will reach balance of power, they will unite, find a fatwa, turn against us.
Do we really want to throw nuclear weapons into this tinderbox right now?
Yeah.
I mean, if Iran gets the bomb, the Saudis said just this week, oh, by the way, we're going to get the bomb. If Iran gets the bomb, we're going nuclear. Turkey, who else in the region? I mean,
But to your question, the missiles that they are developing in Iran, it's certainly to send flowers Why do you, obviously, if you develop missiles, it's for more than that.
And why is Iran spreading its tentacles, by the way, throughout Latin America, at our doorstep? In the Western Hemisphere, over the past 7 years, I believe they opened 4 or 5 new embassies in Latin America. Very interesting, I'm just saying.
But do you think this administration is giving them the leeway to do that?
Yeah, I do. This administration is tripping over itself to strike a deal with Iran, no matter how bad it is.
I always like to play the devil advocate and say, you know, maybe the strategy, and I'm hoping that keep your friends close, enemies closer. But, you know, you don't want to have somebody with a suicide bomber next to you.
That's a little too close.
In fairness to this administration, I think we ought to be clear, I mean, particularly for an Egyptian audience, I don't think their intent is malicious. I don't think their intent is to foment violence in the world and that people will fight it out, or to run away and forcing other people to kind of do things for it. I think they actually think they're accomplishing good. I think what we would say is I think their assessment is just flat wrong. But and maybe unfortunately the road to hell can be paved with good intentions. But I don't think necessarily they're trying to make the Middle East a worse place. I think what's more disturbing is they're making the Middle East a worse place and they don't see it.
Yeah, unintentional, but you know the result is the same at the end of the day,
exactly.
Right? Like, you know, intentions are good to be known, whether they have good intention or bad intention. But you know, you have to you're coming up with a result that you have to face. So
let me just add one more thing. I don't want to impose too much. There are things that we should not do anymore. Stop doing, and there are things that we should begin doing. Stop sending billions of dollars to the Iranian regime, because $3 billion they are getting. They are buying more weapons, they are buying every media they can, every blogger they can. We know that. So we're going to get them $100 billion, they're going to become the superpower. They're going to buy the nuclear power. They're not going to actually make it. And we need to do more. There is a resistance in Libya now. What are we waiting for? We should be supporting them. That's the minimum. We should release more weapons to Egypt. We should help the NGOs. The Sheikh Al-Azhar is beginning a revolution. He's not invited here. He should be invited by Congress. So there is a change of direction. And once we decide to change, then we'll see clearly what not to do and what to do.
Dr. Audate, President Sisi had called for an Arab coalition, and he had called for, and actually we've seen it with the problem at Yemen with the Houthi. Do you think he's going to be able to get the Arabs to unite?
I mean, they are uniting right now, the Sunni parts of them. I mean, when we talk about the Arab world, I almost want to say the Arabic-speaking world, because there's so much diversity within what is Arab. It's not all Arab. So, and this diversity is not only Sunni and Shia, it's much, much more diverse than that. So, but it's, for me, it's really sad to see they're uniting, to have a military, to have, I mean, why wasn't there a union that is economic, a union that is educational, yes, again, because there is a place for military solutions, but the only thing we see in the Arab world is military solutions. We're not seeing anything at the front of education, and the young revolutionaries are all in jail. So that's very alarming. So.
All right, I'm going to ask a question, and I would like a short answer from each of the panelists. Just one sentence, so we can be focused and concentrated. What could be done to stop Daesh or ISIS from preparing for genocide? Lena?
Sorry,
for preparing for, well, genocide, you know, by Genocide Watch, there's eight steps, and one of them is calling people with names, symbolizing, dehumanizing people, and then preparing, and then execution, and then denial. At the end of the day, they say, oh, we didn't do anything. So, you know, preparation. Daesh, from the point of view of a lot of people, and from the point of view of a lot of panelists sitting here in this panel, they're preparing for a genocide. They want to kill a certain group of people, Yazidis, Christians, Sunnis, Shias, and then Shias want to kill them. What need to be done in one statement to stop them from doing that?
I'm a big supporter of soft power. I think that with soft power, communication, understanding what they're about to do, understanding genocide, the idea of utopia that they want to build like ISIS, and communicating it to the region that's...
So sit down on a table with them and talk to them, right?
Yeah, and the population in the region.
Okay.
I think the number one step is you have to kick ISIS out of the law.
Okay, so military action.
Military action, but using countries like Libya and the international forces in those countries, really train them up, equip them so that they can go.
So you believe in using the locals?
The locals, yeah, this is their fight, I think, but the U.S. needs to equip, assist, and support them in all ways.
Dr. Aldi?
I do support, I do think that ultimately it is about the locals, and the U.S. needs to support the creative, non-violent change agents on the ground.
An Arab United Army to seize Raqqa, Mosul, and Derna, Benghazi, and then an army of NGOs to go after and then seize the schools and create a new generation.
I would second that with the United Arab Army. I think the U.S. right now needs to show some kind of leadership role in that. In a perfect world, the Arab armies would do it entirely themselves. But I think right now, the leader of the free world, again, needs to play some kind of role, particularly because at the end of the day, this also threatens us, and it will come back to bite us here in the United States.
Another question to be answered by short answers of all of us. What are the root causes behind radical exam-inspired terror? Do you have an idea?
Sorry, I'll forward this.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I hate the root causes thing. Okay. I think the data on this is very clear. I mean, the reality is the reality, and the factors that produce political and violent change in countries are dependent upon a number of things. And I think the root causes is a bit of not a constructive way to look at the problem. But
I think the root cause is the ideology, and that's where.
I mean, there are places with bad ideologies where you don't have you don't have genocide. There are places that are really poor where you don't have genocide. So
I think it's the ideology of no borders. And that's the ideology is like the global caliphate.
I believe it's authoritarianism and using coercion and violence as mechanisms of influence.
In my view, I build on this. There's a totalitarian elite that creates an ideology that places a chip in the mind of the masses. These are the three things that leads to. So you have to begin there.
I think that's interesting. I think the leadership is in many cases very well educated. Usually the ideological leadership. Some of the foot soldiers are from impoverished backgrounds, but at the end of the day, I think again you have to attack the ideology and the ideological elite. I think that's a good way of putting it, Waleed. These are not guys in caves waving AK-47s. These are very intelligent people. So, but again, I think you have to get to the root of their ideology and combat it.
I have a more elegant answer. There are many paths to genocide. How's that?
All right. I would like to propose to say, is poverty could be a leading factor for terrorism? I disagree myself.
I disagree. I mean, I just...
Lack of education?
Germany in 1940 was not a poor nation.
Yeah. You have medical students in ISIS. Oh, I'm sorry, not any. Okay.
So most of us know.
Exporting terrorism. Look at Vietnam.
The mothership is indoctrination. Now, indoctrination uses all these other ships. One of them is poverty. The other one is sexual problems for youth. The third one is psychological. You could find a lot of other vehicles, but indoctrination is the center.
Yeah, these American and European kids are not doing it for lack of economic opportunity. They're not gravitating to the caliphate because they're some poor street urchins on a street corner.
I mean, look at what happened in China. I mean, the Japanese were not poor, and China wasn't particularly poor. Poverty was the most grotesque genocides in the modern era.
I'm going to touch on a very sensitive topic, and I have a personal opinion I would like to share at the end. But the question is, should the Prophet Muhammad, Jesus, Moses, or Buddha need to be drawn in cartoons? Lena?
I wouldn't support making fun of these. They can be drawn in cartoons, but paying respect to people who believe and have them as their religious symbol. But I, of course, completely do not agree with any actions that cost.
The number one way to honor a religion is to fervently believe in religious liberty. And religious criticism is often the mechanism by that which religion becomes stronger in its faith. So I have a real issue with the notion of respect. I'm all for respect. I'm all for being respectful. But that does not trump the fundamental right of religious liberty. Religious liberty is the foundation of religious freedom and always will be.
So we have a no and a yes. Tara?
And I agree with you.
So another yes.
I mean, this is a very tricky issue, clearly, because
yeah, but we had a couple of incidents already based on that question.
I'm against coercion and violence and authoritarianism, and I think it's an act of violence to mock somebody's sacred. I wouldn't do it myself, but I also believe in freedom of speech and freedom of expression. I don't believe somebody who does that should be persecuted, but I personally, as I would not teach anybody to ridicule, that's an act of coercion and violence towards another. But they have the right, for expression and belief or non-belief. Dr.
Walid?
The reason this question cannot be answered by yes or no, it's like H2O, the equation for water. I mean, it's oxygen or hydrogen. Obviously, in liberal democracies, we like it or not, anybody is protected in expressing whatever they want. However, to make this into a strategy in the world of ideas, of course not. First of all, it's inefficient. Second of all, it leads to nowhere. And fourth of all, you have, in the midst of waging a war of ideas in general terms, you are, without awakening the masses to a reform, engaging with the extremists to have results as happened in several places. That's not an intelligent strategy. But at the same time, in liberal democracies, if people want to do it, they are protected. We like it or not. That's how the Constitution is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Christian. I don't like when people demean Jesus and draw characters, mock him, etc. But I'm not going to go out and kill somebody about it. We live in free societies, and this is how it is. So yeah, I mean, I think Dr. Carafano put it very eloquently. This is a bedrock of religious liberty. So I think we need to continue to respect that. And people might not like it, but we live in the West. This is a Judeo-Christian civilization, and we don't kill people when they disagree with us or offend us.
My opinion, what I wanted to share with you, because I was born and raised in the Middle East, so I know the culture. And I moved here 15 years ago, and I learned the culture. We have a lack of communication here. Over there in the Middle East, the religion is much more important than their own self. And I'm talking all religions. I went to Netherlands about 13 years ago, and I attended a show called Chicago. I still remember the name, and they were mocking all the prophets. But they didn't mock Prophet Muhammad. And I got offended myself. But obviously I didn't kill anybody, but I was very upset. So I really think that religion is a very sensitive topic. Prophets are very holy and sacred. I understand that we should not kill somebody to do that, but we should not really also encourage drawing of sacred symbols in cartoons, because it's somebody that somebody they believe in, in other religions, somebody they pray to. I think we have so many topics to to mock and do things, and just avoid religion. I mean, we know that it's a problem, so why do we trigger it? That's my take on that. Who defines hate speech, and where is the line drawn for free speech? Eric Stackelbeck?
Who defines hate speech? Yes. Wow, today that's a good question today. It kind of goes to your last question. What are the limits in a free society? We live in the West. We have freedom of speech, religion. We're a very tolerant, open society. You can pretty much, in America today, say anything you want to a large degree. That's where we're at. So who defines it? I mean...
So the society, that would be
I was going to say, society itself is pretty much, in many ways, defined it.
In a sense, it's the elite. I mean, we think it's a society, but the elite comes, and basically it's in the classroom. It's the academics who come and tell us what you need to say and not to say, what is PC or what is not PC. But let me go beyond that just 1 inch. We have a problem here which does not exist in the Middle East that is called the charge of Islamophobia. And that has to be part of the debate because it's not well understood in the Middle East. I speak Arabic, engage with Arab societies, and then engage here. The real limit is not to call openly in your speech for a collective punishment. Meaning this is a community, it has to disappear, it has to be ethnic cleansed. This is a limitation that law should ban you from doing because it's part of an effort. But if you say, well, I think that there was a caliphate in the 7th century and what they've done was not good and the Crusaders were not good, this is a historical reading. Islamophobia was taken in the West to an extreme that should have gone, that shouldn't have gone that far. Anybody who criticizes the jihadist ideology was criticized as an Islamophobe. What happened is that you created the real Islamophobe. Those who are actually pushing back against an entire religion are doing so psychologically because they were not given the right to actually engage in a discussion with jihadism or against it. So we have to be aware of the weapon you use. Islamophobia, meaning calling on the genocide of a community, should it be Christianophobia or anti-Semitism, that is a limitation. But to use this to stop a debate, a public debate, I think this will be counterproductive, and we have the counterproduction seen very clearly.
Tara and Dr. Awaidet, whoever wants to start first, how can we promote gender equality in the Middle East to fix broken societies?
I think we should model change in this country. You cannot, you have to be the change. And in this country, we don't have equal pay for women. So let's start by modeling the change.
Pay?
Yeah, women.
Yeah, but I think the problem with the equality of rights in the U.S.
Once we have become that change, I really would love to see more scholarship for girls in the Middle East. I'd love to see the U.S. taking an active role in offering women opportunities, because it's really difficult for women in that part of the world. Legally, we are persecuted. In Jordan, for example, a very supposedly liberal country, it is legal to kill your female relative if she defies you. Honor crimes are legal. What insanity is this? That you can kill another human being if you feel like it. Yeah, you could call it honor crimes, but most women who get killed are virgins. They get killed over inheritance, over. There should be no justification for something like honor crimes. It should be. There should be a lot of attention internationally. We have laws that protect rapists. And
where's that in the Middle East?
In Jordan, in Morocco. So if a rapist raped a woman, if he murdered her, he is not persecuted at all. He escapes all punishment. So they're thinking of ways, we have parliament convening to think of ways to protect criminals. So this rapist can rape his victim whenever he wants, and when he's done, he could just say, you're divorced, and according to the laws that allow him to divorce her with a sentence. And for her to have that same right, she has to be almost dead, have never made a mistake, caught on camera being beaten almost to death, and maybe the judge will grant her divorce. So we have very oppressive legal system against women. And I loved what you said, that unless women are treated like equal human beings, I don't know how we can produce a more civilized, tolerant societies.
Yeah, why don't they ask the guys the question of how we get gender equality? Because
I think guys are looking for gender equality now.
I think that the answer is that was the purpose of human rights. That creates the space for everybody to maximize their potential as a human being. So I'm agreed. So equality of justice before the law, right? Equality of property rights of opportunity. These are the kinds of things that will create the space for women and men. And I think when we obviously, I think women and children, we in Western society in particular grant them a particular protective status, but fundamentally, the proliferation of human rights is the single most powerful engine for all ships to rise.
I agree. Can I just ask?
We are at...
Can I... Gender equality, can we have her speak
affirmative action?
No, can I just ask, do you think there is more space for women themselves to demand these rights? What can be done from women themselves?
You know, this morning actually, I read the story which really broke my heart of a 20-year-old who was beaten constantly. She was a victim of domestic violence. She was in the hospital several times. They really burnt parts of her body. Imagine, and eventually her father shot her 5 times in the head because she was in love with a man and she wanted to marry him, and they refused because they decide who she marries. And then they shot her dead. This is the story of a 20-year-old who has already seen so many atrocities. So how can you stand up for your rights? There's no legal system to protect you. The religious institutions tell you it's more important for us that you are coerced, used in an act of violence to use this piece of cloth than people cutting heads. You have a societal endorsement of this. So women really need support. They need the outside world support.
Tara, do you have the take on this?
I think one of the ways that the United States did do in Afghanistan, I know, is that they had the female engagement teams, and they would train up the U.S. women military members, and they would go out in the field and they would teach the Afghan women how to have their own businesses, and they would teach them like how to have their beehives or raise chick poultry. And it was practical ways that they would empower women out in the field to be able to, if you can make your own money, that gives them, they're so inferior to the men because they have no way to work. They have no means to be able to provide for their families. And I think that's one thing that we can be doing in other countries, is working with these women and training them up to be able to have their own businesses so that they feel more independent and that they can provide for their families without being so inferior then to the men, and to be able to have more education as well, so that they get more involved with government and they can get more voices and have that education as well. So I think those are 2 things, the business and the education, that we can do to help women.
This was actually U.S. policy under this and even the previous administration, as a result of advice given to them, that get them jobs, they'll become independent. Get them education, they'll become sovereign over their independence. The problem is that they do not live in a liberal democracy. Yeah. We tend to forget that there's 100 miles difference. This could be applied here, in Sweden, maybe in Colombia, in other places. We have to be conscious of what countries, what societies we're dealing with.
The speed limit, we need to know the speed limit
Yeah, I mean, it's a fight for these women. I mean, I've been all over the institutions and agencies of government that deals with strategic communications. We cannot deal with them as individuals. Meaning, if we go and meet with a woman and give her all what she needs, and then she's surrounded by all these male forces that are organized, that are crushing her, what they need to do is get organized. We need to fund the NGOs who are working on women's issues. That's more important than 100 jobs, because if they win and they get elected in a city in Afghanistan or elsewhere, they could get the job. So it's really empowerment, political empowerment. And to do that, we need to direct our foreign aid where it should go. It's a huge subject. And also we need to support the political forces of change. I mean, it's clear who in Egypt and Tunisia is moving forward. And it's very clear who is moving backward. And it's very clear who are the progressives in Iran. And it's very clear who are the Ayatollahs who are pushing back. If we don't understand that map, we're not going anywhere at the end of the day.
So that takes me to my question. Should the U.S. and Europe, and I say the U.S. because, as I believe Eric Steckelbeck said, we're the main leader in the world, do more to support a government like the current Egyptian government with the new Egyptian President Sisi, who has taken the lead to fight terrorism, not only for Egypt, but for the whole world?
I believe so. I mean, when President Sisi goes out to Al-Azhar University on New Year's Day this year and basically calls for a reformation within Islam in front of a room full of leading imams and clerics, that was a bold move, to say the least. And then a few days later, he goes to a Coptic church.
And putting in mind, he's a true loyal Muslim.
He is. He's a devout Muslim. He's a practicing Muslim. To do that, to me, that showed great boldness. And to me, that's the kind of leaders we've been asking for, right? We're looking for true Muslim, Islamic reformers in the Middle East. And you have a man who is saying the right things, doing the right things, crushing the same jihadists that want to kill us here in America and in Europe. So I don't see why there's not more support for him. Not only is there not more support for him, a few months ago we had a Muslim Brotherhood delegation here at the State Department.
Yeah.
At the State Department, at Foggy Bottom. To me that said it all about where we stand right now.
Dr. Walid?
Look, I'm going to top this with the meeting very quickly that Tara was part of a month and a half ago. We met with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar. And let's make this public here in the United States. And what we've heard from him in English and in Arabic and in French, because he has been educated in France, is the revolution itself. I mean, what greater leader in the Sunni Islamic world has called for a change of curriculum in high schools and middle schools? This is the real battlefield. People are talking about soft matters. I mean, if that happens, we are moving towards a different sphere. And I hope that in the Shia world, we need to identify and locate those secular democracy forces. I mean, the Iranian opposition has in its center a movement that is really secular. We need to work with them. Shia clerics are very important in the reform. So the next policy that we need to have here, reform here in Washington, is to deal with these heroes of the change in the Sunni world and in the Shia world.
And I hate to sound doom and gloom, but it's probably not going to happen before 2016, before a change of leadership here. I hate to be a downer, but all of our policy prescriptions, I don't believe this current administration is going to follow them, to say the least.
Nadia? No. Let's take it in order, if you don't mind.
I really applaud the move by Sisi to call for religious reform. That is a bold move, and that is really refreshing.
I think it goes along the line that you have been studying what you're preaching for.
And now I want to see action. I'm anticipating, because we so need this move. It is so overdue. The curriculums are unacceptable, what we are teaching our children. Unacceptable. The hate, misogyny, violence. We need to create a citizen that is civilized, able to contribute to the human family, that is an asset. And I can't see this happening without real religious reform.
Tara?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where the United States needs to get behind the right people. I think that's where we failed, is that the United States, we have values, we have beliefs. We stand for, no matter if you're Democrat or Republican, we have principles of freedom and liberty and justice. And we should be supporting people in countries that believe in those same values. And I think that's where we're seeing policy failure, because we're supporting the wrong people. Like in Egypt, we were supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. So when the Egyptians, millions come out and they arrest the Muslim Brotherhood and the terrorists, the United States comes and pressures them consistently, never ending, to be able to release the terrorists. And now I think we're doing the same thing in Libya, is that there's a government in Tobruk and the Libyan army, and there's the people that want to have those same values, that believe in that. And the United States is again failing to support those people groups. And so I think we need to get behind people like President Sisi and the Grand Imam, who are calling for this religious reformation, and the people that stand for the same values that America does.
No, I just want to say, just real briefly, I mean, we talk a lot in that history about the great leaders, but great leaders rarely take countries to great places without great people. I think America needs to place a bet on the Egyptian people, because I think the Egyptian people have earned a promise of their freedom in the future, and I think we should be supported.
Lena?
Yeah, I'll just back the experts, and I think we need more media coverage on this too. People need to know and to be able to support and spread the message.
Okay, last question, and I meant to push it back because it's been happening, and we've been hearing about it last couple of weeks about the Armenian genocide, and I wanted to ask what are the Armenians gaining by calling it a genocide, and how would that benefit them in the future? I could hear from anybody who would like to talk about this topic.
You know, I think a sense of justice, like in order for, I would imagine, in order to heal, to move forward. Clearly they can't bring back the time, but sometimes just for the other party to recognize, you know what, I'm sorry, I wronged you. There's something really healing that liberates a nation to move forward.
Recognition?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, a sense of justice.
Justice.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Dr. Karafan, I'd like to hear what you'd say about that.
Well, you know, I'm a historian, but the collapse of the Ottoman Empire is actually not one of my areas of expertise. So there's this notion about reconciliation, right? And the path to reconciliation is really, really important. And it takes different notions. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes, and I don't know the best dynamic here, but clearly these are two people which have great injury and great fear and great animosities. In this current political environment, I think too often we go back to historical events and we pin our current issues on that historical event as the origin of this thing. But clearly there is pain and anger. And the question for me is how do you bridge that? And that to me is the great challenge. I think we asked the wrong question, which is it a genocide? Is it not a genocide? Should they apologize? Should they not apologize? It's the same issue we see between the Japanese and South Korea. We never get to the fundamental issue, which is what is the pain and what is the hurt and how do we heal that? And that's the kind of discussion I would think that needs to happen before we move on. Dr.
Faris, do you have?
Well, I second what has been said right now, and I think if you want to focus on what each side and the Armenian-Turkish issue is trying to say, the Armenians, and I agree with you, wants a statement. The Turks, any Turkish political force, is concerned that a statement would lead
to something, sanctions or anything?
To sanctions, to remuneration, to the partition of the country, to many things. So,
but do we all agree that 1.5 million people were killed in that region at that era, 19?
Well, there were so many millions killed that I think the right thing to do is that for the international society to come to a point and recognize all genocides, every population that moved. You know how many populations have moved? Of course these are genocides. I mean, half of Poland moved into Ukraine. Part of Germany does not exist anymore. I think it should not be only focused on one. It should be an international convention to recognize all genocides and move forward in reconciliation. But that's so big of a goal, and it needs a maturation in international society.
What I'm trying to get out of this is I want to track or trace the pattern of all the genocides, or at least the ones that were identified, so we can learn, because obviously it's 2015 and we haven't, as humans, haven't learned from our mistakes in the past, and we keep on doing them over and over and over. And as I mentioned earlier in the beginning, I feel that we're in the preparation period of another genocide in the Middle East, whether this is going to take some of the minorities, all the minorities, I'm not sure. But this is where I'm getting to. So,
well, there are genocides that happened, I mean, last summer. These are micro-genocides, but they are still genocide. The entire Assyrian population of Nineveh Valley has been ethnically cleansed to Kurdistan. The entire Yazidi population has been moved. There are ongoing genocides in Darfur. I don't know what George Clooney is going to do about it now, because he has been very championing this. It is still on. There are 3 potential problems in Sudan. So that's why I go back to the principle. This is something that should go back to the international community, Security Council, General Assembly, and find a global declaration on these issues, because everybody is concerned about genocides to happen and genocide that really happened before and their consequences.
Yeah, I'm far less optimistic about either answer. I mean, global solutions to anything, I work well on Star Trek, but it's a globe of many married people, and the notion that you have a global consensus on anything, I think, is just utopia. And actually, I think your response is kind of utopia. If we should just learn all the lessons. These are actually kind of Western conceits, which is if we just had perfect knowledge, right? We just knew bad things wouldn't happen. But the reality of human history is no matter how much we try to perfect our knowledge, terrible things happen. Maybe the answer is the perfect knowledge that we seek is just never going to be there. We are going to make mistakes and have tragedies. And rather than a goal of let's prevent bad things from happening ever, let's recognize that bad things are going to happen, and let's act like humans to try to deal and mitigate that suffering as much as we can. So in this lofty goal of let's solve the problem, sometimes we watch these horrible, terrible things happen beneath it. Let's deal with the horrible, terrible things.
A note of hope based on what my colleague has mentioned. where revolution is really happening and it's not being noted. It's where governments are not acting, where elites are not acting. It's social media. It's that free space. You would be surprised to know how people who have accused each other of genocide in terms of establishment are talking to each other in terms of Facebook. I'm saying Armenian and Greeks and Turks and Arabs and Jews and Palestinians and Israel. They are talking to each other. We are missing the train. That's why I salute what your effort is all about. There is another planet brewing underneath. This is where we should go and tap into these forces.
I would like to thank you all for being part of American Pulse United We Stand to Stop Genocide. Your answers and thoughts are very worth learning from and paying attention to, and hopefully we'll learn from our mistakes, Dr. Carfano. And I would let J.D. Gordon give us his closing remarks and the things that we talked about, so we can actually put them in effect. We want this, what happened, what we talked about tonight, to reach to the White House, to the United Nations Security Council, to a lot of organizations, NGOs that are sponsoring that kind of thought. So, anybody would like to ask a question? Yeah, you can go ahead to them.
First of all, thank you so much for putting this wonderful panel together. I really think, I personally have invested a lot of time to come from New York, and it's worth it. Thank you all for this, and I wish to see something like that on CNN or Fox News. The question is, I'm a political analyst myself, and I see that the Obama administration dealing with the Middle East was in such a way that our reputation now in the Middle East is really very bad. Is it because of the lack of the experience of the advisors and the White House advocate, or it is intentional?
Did you, can you direct the question to any of the panelists?
I don't believe it's intentional. But you know, there's a difference in methodology. President Obama believes in diplomacy, in non-military solutions, and I mean, you can call that naive, you can call it inappropriate for the context, you can call it, but I would not call it at all intentional, that he wants to, you know, he treats the people of the region as inferior. I don't believe there's bad intention, personally.
No, I agree. I don't think it's malicious. I just think it's very ineffective.
Any more questions? Please.
I just wanted to get your thoughts about what do you think the role of domestic Islamist groups has been in keeping the United States from paying attention to the genocides? You have groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations, Syrian American Council, and other, Egyptian Americans for Democracy and Human Rights, which is connected with the Brotherhood, actively lobbying, going to the State Department, going to the White House. I mean, how has their influence, colored our perspective?
That's a major problem. I'm glad you brought that up. The American and European Brotherhood networks are almost the gatekeepers, or the self-appointed gatekeepers in many ways, and the self-appointed spokesman for the Muslim communities here in the West. I think of CARE, the Council on Islamic Relations, ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America, MAS, the whole alphabet soup of American Islamist groups. These are individuals who have been at the White House. They're at the White House, the State Department, they're meeting with the FBI. They're helping to shape our policies in the Middle East and in counterterrorism. So it's a major problem. Look, at the end of the day, these are concrete links to the global Brotherhood network. In many ways, the Brotherhood's been weakened severely in Egypt. In many ways, they've kind of shifted their power base to the West. Now, they dress like this. These aren't guys, they don't look like ISIS. Suits, ties, Western educated, eloquent, fluent in English, very charming when you meet them. I've interviewed many of them, very charming when you meet them. But at the end of the day, the ideology is the same. Tactics are different. I consider the Brotherhood kind of like termites, where they burrow into a host society and they eat away at it from within. Well, now basically you have a situation here in the West, particularly here in the U.S., where the fox is guarding the hen house. And you have Islamists who are undemocratic, to say the least, who are actually have the ear of this administration. It's a huge problem, and they're influencing policy. Major, major problem.
I could add one thing. Of course, he's the expert here. He wrote books on it. But I can say from a historical perspective, the Ikhwan Brotherhood lobby has been responsible for obstructing U.S. outreach to civil societies in the region and minorities for 30 years. The pro-Iranian Khomeiniist lobby here has been responsible for obstructing the outreach of the American government and people to the people of Iran. So it has consequences. But this is the country where lobby group is what it is about. I mean, if you are funded, if you are supported, if you are backed by elites, you win. And it's a political battle that's going to continue. But my projection is changes in Egypt are going to eventually have an effect on this lobby with time. Hopefully changes in Iran are going to also have an effect. So on the long run, these lobbies, like the pro-Soviet lobbies, where are they today? You know, they collapsed.
Now they're pro-Russian lobbies.
They are there? Okay. They're mutated.
All right, any more questions? Okay. All right, so thank you very much. JD, please.
Well, thank you so much, Michael, for that terrific panel tonight. Thank you so much to our distinguished panelists. This is the best panel I've ever seen on the topic, so thank you, Lena. Clap for everybody. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you, Walid. Thank you, Eric. I think a couple of the key takeaways we heard tonight were, number one, that we have to identify the ideology that's causing the problems these days. We have to name it what it is. It's radical Islam these days, and we have to confront it. We have to name it and confront it. You can't defeat an enemy that's attacking you unless you can acknowledge what it is. So that was kind of a common theme through here, identifying the ideology and working to solve it through fixing education systems, through gender equality, through a number of mechanisms, but you have to identify the ideology. Another common theme was the use of military force. At some point, you have to be able to have significant military capability to defeat groups like the Nazis during World War II or ISIS right now, because it's very important to stop genocide before it happens. I like Jim's analogy very much about the forest fire. Once the forest fire is raging, it's already too late. So I think that you have to have a very capable military and a coalition. I love the idea that Walid was talking about, and Eric as well, about the Pan-Arab Army. A coalition, like we see the Saudis have a coalition right now. They're conducting airstrikes in Yemen. But if you had a ground force made up of Arab armies to go in and take cities like Raqqa, Mosul, we'd be much better off today, because it is more central to their backyard than it is to here. Although we are a target for every day the Islamic State exists, we're a target for another 9/11. We're a target for lone wolf attacks, wolf pack attacks, as Walid likes to say, because they're really part of a pack mentality. But for every day the Islamic State exists, and Najeed's exactly right, once the Islamic State's defeated, Daesh is defeated, it'll just be the next group. Yesterday the big threat was Al-Qaeda. Before that it was Taliban. We've been attacked by radical Islam groups since the 1970s, and unless we stop that ideology, these attacks are just going to continue. So I think this was a very valuable exchange of ideas. I'm so glad the panel made it. And one more good analogy I wanted to recognize too was Najeed's about the forest too. It's the million trees, I think you said, are quiet, but one tree falls and it's a big noise. The media has a better role to play too, not just the White House and our policy. The media focuses so much attention on Daesh, but almost nothing for heroes in the Middle East, like you're talking about, Ahmed. We need more coverage of that. That's why I'm glad we're talking about it at the National Press Club, to highlight heroes, because there are in the Middle East, but you almost never hear about them. I'm glad you brought that up. And my last point is about gender equality, and I make this pitch at every speech I give when I talk about the Middle East, is Cleopatra. I wrote a column last year in the Washington Times. Egypt is the key to defeating radical Islam, and I always try to encourage Egyptians to export their culture, their ancient culture, the land of the pyramids and the pharaohs. Could anybody ever imagine Cleopatra being told that she has to cover up? Could anybody imagine the goddess Isis, when you see her, the goddess Isis, who was the lead goddess of Egypt, the lead god like Zeus for the Greeks? She is depicted without slaves. Today, she'd be hounded, harassed, who knows what in Egypt today. That has to be turned around, and the reason it all happened is because of the culture from the Wahhabist culture from the 70s, exported $100 billion worth of their Wahhabism, changed the cultures all around. If you look, people were in the 70s in Egypt. One of my greatest friends in Egypt is Yosra. She's an actress, and she comes to New York every year and she gives a speech. Could you imagine in the 70s, people didn't wear the same clothes they do now. They wore skirts and dresses. They're dressed like the ladies up here today in Egypt, Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan. All that changed because the exportation of Wahhabism. And in order to fix that culture, Walid hit it right on the head when he talked about the mothers raising kids. They're the ones with the first impact. And if the mothers are treated like second class, third class, fourth class citizens, how can you expect the children to be functional? You can't. The same with the teachers, as Eric brought up as well. That's the next step. So the gender equality cannot be understated there. So that's why I always make my pitch, go Cleopatra. Thank you very much.